Okay, let's talk about major depressive disorder. You've probably heard it called clinical depression. It's a phrase that gets thrown around a lot, right? But what does it actually mean? Because it's way more than just feeling sad. So in this explainer, we're going to break it all down. What it is, what science tells us about its causes, and importantly, how it's treated.
All right, to really get a sense of just how huge this is, let's start with one number. Just one. 163 million.
Yep, that's the number of people worldwide who are dealing with major depressive disorder, and that's just in 2017. So you can see this isn't some rare, isolated thing. It's a massive part of the human experience for people all over the planet.
And a number that big, it brings up a really important question, doesn't it? I mean, look, we all have bad days. We all feel sad sometimes. So what's the actual difference? What makes clinical depression, well, clinical?
Well, to figure that out, let's start with the basics. We need a solid clinical definition to build on.
Okay, so the official definition, it really hones in on three key things that have to be present for at least 2 weeks straight. First, a low mood that's just pervasive. It colors everything. Second, a real drop in self-esteem. And third, and this is a big one, a loss of interest or pleasure in activities you once loved.
And this is where that line between regular sadness and clinical depression gets super clear. You know, everyday sadness, it's usually temporary, and you can often point to why you're sad. With MDD, it's persistent, it's pervasive. But the real game changer is this concept called anhedonia. It's a clinical term, but it basically means the inability to feel pleasure. Think about that. It's not just about feeling bad, it's about the absence of feeling good. And that, right there, is what can totally disrupt someone's ability to live their daily life.
So, okay, if it's that serious, the next logical question is, where does it come from? What causes it? And the answer is, well, it's complicated. It's not just one thing. It's this intricate dance between our genes and our life experiences.
Let's throw another number out there, about 40%. That's how much of the risk for major depression is thought to be genetic. So yeah, our biology, it plays a really big part in the story.
Now, here's the thing. It's almost never just your genes. And it's almost never just what happens to you in life. The leading idea for how this works is called the diathesis stress model. Sounds fancy, but the concept is pretty simple. Diathesis just means you have a pre-existing vulnerability. And the stress part is, well, stressful life events that can come along and flip that vulnerability on. It's the ultimate nature meets nurture situation.
There's actually a really great analogy to help visualize this. It's called the cup analogy. So just imagine for a second that your genetic vulnerability is a cup.
Okay, you got the cup? Now, think about all the stressors life throws our way. Tough childhood experiences, chronic illness, big life changes, loss. All of that is like water being poured into your cup. So if you have a higher genetic risk, maybe you were born with a smaller cup. It just doesn't take as much water, as much stress, for it to overflow. Someone with a lower genetic risk might have a much larger cup. But, and this is the most important part of the analogy, if you pour enough water into any cup, no matter how big it is, it's eventually going to overflow.
Right, so we've got this complex mix of genes and environment. How on earth does a doctor actually diagnose something like that?
This is super important to understand. There is no blood test for depression. You can't just go to a lab and get a result. The diagnosis comes from a careful clinical assessment. It's really about a conversation, about someone's reported experiences and symptoms.
And clinicians have a guide for this. It's not just guesswork. They use established criteria, most famously from the DSM, which is basically the handbook for mental health disorders. They're looking for a specific cluster of symptoms that have been hanging around for a while, and if you look at the list, you'll see it's so much more than just feeling sad. It hits your sleep, your energy levels, your ability to focus, your appetite, even your sense of self-worth.
Okay, let's switch gears and talk about some good news, because depression is absolutely treatable. But just like there's no single cause, there's no single magic bullet cure. The best way to think about it is having a whole toolkit of options and finding the right combination that works for the individual.
Yeah, the most effective approaches almost always involve more than one thing. It's about a combined strategy. You've got psychotherapy, medication, lifestyle stuff, and even other therapies all working together.
So let's peek inside that toolkit, shall we? You've got psychotherapy, things like cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT, which is all about helping you change your thinking patterns. Then, of course, there's medication, like antidepressants called SSRIs, that can help with the underlying brain chemistry. Don't underestimate lifestyle changes either. I mean, physical exercise has been shown to be just as effective as meds for a lot of people. And for the really tough treatment-resistant cases, there are other powerful options, like ECT.
All right, to wrap things up, let's look at the bigger picture, the long-term outlook, and the way we all talk about, or don't talk about, depression.
I've got one last number for you, and it's a big one. 80%. That's the estimated percentage of people who have one major depressive episode who will then have at least one more. And that's a really important thing to understand. It means that for many, many people, depression isn't something that just happens once. It can be a chronic condition that you have to manage over time.
And people have been trying to find the right words for this for, well, forever. You've probably heard the phrase Winston Churchill made famous. He called his depression his black dog, just this constant, dark companion. It's such a powerful image, right? It perfectly captures that persistent, shadowing feeling of the illness. And it also kind of hints at why people have had to use metaphors, because the stigma has made it so hard to talk about directly. So where does that leave us? Well, we've definitely moved past that old, simplistic chemical imbalance theory. We know now that depression is this incredibly complex dance between our biology, our psychology, and the world around us. And that deeper, more nuanced understanding really leaves us with a huge question to think about. Now that we know all this, how do we get better at supporting the millions and millions of people who are living in the shadow of that black dog?